Hi, Rose here. In this video, I want to talk about what actually wakes one of Jehovah's Witnesses up. What is it that gets them to actually question something that is deeply ingrained in them? It's not always what you might think. I'm going to insert portions of David Splain's 2022 Regional Convention talk. At the end of this video, I'll play another portion of the talk to break it up as one of Jehovah's Witnesses, how I would have viewed it when I was completely believing with all my heart, when I was indoctrinated with a mental grip on my mind that I didn't realize, and how I view what Splain said now, being able to look in from a completely different perspective and open mind. Many people think they should be able to show a witness something factual, and that should do it. Let me tell you from my personal experience, that's not always the case. Jehovah's Witnesses are indoctrinated. Indoctrination is the process of teaching a person or group to accept a set of beliefs uncritically. Jehovah's Witnesses are told not to question anything they are being taught because it comes from the governing body. Anything heard from the stage, in videos, or what they read in the publications come from the governing body, which they receive from God. When a witness hears something negative regarding the organization, their first reaction is to believe it came from Satan as lies, because that's what they are constantly told.
And so the devil can use an outright attack. He can use persecution to try to batter the structure of the Christian congregation, but sometimes he uses rot from within, a subtle means to attack us. But whatever method he uses, we have to fight. Our faith is involved, and our faith is worth fighting for.
As one of Jehovah's Witnesses, not only are you indoctrinated to believe everything you are told, you're also told you will have negative outcomes if you listen to anything that goes against what their governing bodies state as fact. As David Splain stated, you will become rot from within if you say anything negative.
But sometimes he uses rot from within, a subtle means to attack us.
So Jehovah's Witnesses have been indoctrinated or conditioned mentally to put up this very thick mental wall of defense when it comes to anything negative about the organization. This is something that they hear on a regular basis. Witnesses are told not to listen, watch, or entertain anything that is viewed as apostate information.
We're going to discuss two of the subtle means Satan uses to weaken our faith: apostasy and negative reports about Jehovah's Witnesses in the media. Brothers and sisters who are troubled by something they saw on a web page, an accusation, a rumor about the society or about the organization. And the problem is, they had no idea that apostates were behind it. Spiritual poison.
So even if something is factual, they are told not to believe it, because those are satanic, apostate lies.
We can contribute to the oneness, rejecting false stories that are designed to separate us from Jehovah's organization. As an example, think about the apostate-driven lies and dishonesties that Jehovah's organization is permissive toward pedophiles. I mean, that is ridiculous, isn't it? If anybody takes action against someone who would threaten our young ones and takes action to protect our young ones, it's Jehovah's organization. We reject outright such lies.
So facts don't necessarily work, even if it seems obvious to you, or was even printed in past publications. To them, those are things that they are not to look at. Waking up, my husband explained it to me this way. He told me that our indoctrination is like the sturdy wall in a dam. When something negative is being said, this thick mental wall goes up. But when something happens to us negatively regarding our belief system, it puts a crack into that wall, just like a dam. If there's even a slight crack or piece of the dam that falls off, it weakens the dam, right? Well, compare that crack to a seed of doubt for Jehovah's Witnesses. That's what happened to me. I grew up in a very large family, and we were all very close. Nephews and nieces were considered just like our own children. Well, 16 years ago, my children stopped going to meetings. Even though they never told me their reasons at that time, what happened as a result of their choices is what started a 12-year process for me. When my children stopped going to meetings, even though they weren't disfellowshipped, my family started to put them at arm's length. You can basically say that my children were being soft shunned. Please remember, at this point, I was a complete believer. I never looked at anything I wasn't supposed to, and I believed everything that came from the publications or the stage. So I understood why my family was doing what they were, but it didn't feel right. To me, it just seemed so unloving, and it hurt me. How could a loving organization run by a loving God tell me and my family to turn our backs on my children? Looking back now, I see that the way my children were being treated is what started my seed of doubt. That's what started the crack in my dam. Now, many of you might ask, if that's the case, why didn't I stop believing at that time? Why did it take me 12 years to finally wake up? Because I had this deep, indoctrinated mental hold on me. I truly believed this was Jehovah's organization, and I had been taught, since I was old enough to understand, not to question anything. Everything else was a bald-faced lie.
Those are both bald-faced lies.
But I couldn't stop this nagging feeling that the way my children were being treated was wrong. This was also happening during my divorce to my then husband. Remember, Jehovah hates a divorcing. And even though I had scriptural grounds, I was constantly hearing from my family how I was making the wrong choice, which again felt wrong to me. I didn't realize it at the time, but the crack in my dam was getting a little bigger. In 2010, when David Splain came up with the new understanding of the 1914 generation of Matthew 24, I remember being floored because they were using an overlapping generation that they had already used and discarded. They just had changed the narrative, and I couldn't even explain that new narrative to myself. It didn't make any sense, which made that crack in my dam even bigger. Because I had this constant nagging feeling things weren't right, I started to notice other things as well. When I would go to the district assembly, which is what the regional conventions were called then, I noticed credit card machines were being set up for donations. I remember thinking, why are they accepting credit cards now? I thought about those who couldn't afford much, and now they were going to be paying interest on any contributions they made. Our meetings started to be shortened, which was great for the extra time I had, but our meetings were supposed to be very important. They had recently just done away with the home book studies, and now they were shortening the public talks again. They used to be an hour, then it was 45 minutes, now 30 minutes. Our time slips completely changed during this time as well. we went from noting everything we placed individually and only counting books and magazines as placements to counting tracts as placements as well. Then we even started counting having someone watch a video as a placement. Our kingdom ministry, which is what we had used my entire life, was done away with. TVs had been set up in our kingdom hall, and videos went from a special event to having several at every meeting. The shadow people seemed ridiculous to me. How are we supposed to learn public speaking by watching a shadow person? But that mental hold was strong with me. During all of this, I had remarried. Unbeknownst to me, my husband had completely woken up, and he started asking me reasonable questions. He would ask me how something stated in a talk made sense to me. He would say things like, "Have you ever noticed when a person gives an answer, they're basically stating the exact same thing that they just read in the article?" Which made me mad, because I immediately thought, no, they put it in their own words. But deep down, I knew he was right. He asked why they would only read a verse in the Bible instead of the whole context. He would try to talk to me about 607 or the new generation teaching, but I would just shut down. I would get upset and tell him I didn't want to talk anymore because he was being so negative. Even with all the nagging questions I already was having, that mental indoctrination would take over. Then in 2019, there was a Watchtower article on child sexual abuse. Because of my past, that article incensed me. So my husband felt it was about time I heard about the Australian Royal Commission. Now, I only watched Jeffrey Jackson's testimony because I felt that that would be okay, as he was a governing body member. But what I saw was a governing body member lying under oath for no other reason than to deny what actually was factual, because it made the organization look bad. There was no spiritual warfare going on. Jackson was just not being truthful and forthcoming. Well, after watching Jeffrey Jackson's testimony, the crack in my dam split even wider. And it was only after hearing Jackson's testimony that I actually allowed myself to look at something everyone else would consider apostate. I bought Raymond Fran's book, Crisis of Conscience. But even then, I remember how guilty I felt when the book was delivered. It took me a week to finally take it out of the package and another week to actually start reading it. But when I did start reading it, I couldn't put it down. My parents knew Ray, and I remember when they told me he had become an apostate in the 80s. And it was then that my indoctrinated, thick mental dam came crashing down. This is how much of a mental hold the indoctrination has on Jehovah's Witnesses. I remember I would lie awake in bed at night and I would go over and over what I had read in that book, what I was learning about 607 BCE, about 1914 and the generation teachings. What I was doing was literally trying to unlearn something that had been ingrained in me as absolute truth my entire life. And believe me, that's not easy. In fact, for me, maybe because of my age, it was very traumatic. My core beliefs were being turned upside down, and I was starting to realize the impact that this organization had had on me my entire life. So in speaking with one of Jehovah's Witnesses, remember when you say anything they feel is negative, their mental wall of indoctrination goes up. They shut down. It's literally hard for their brain to comprehend what you are trying to tell them. And there's even a term for it. It's called cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is the discomfort a person feels when something that they are hearing goes against what they believe, what they were indoctrinated to believe unquestionably. Cognitive dissonance is actually a psychological phenomenon that occurs when a person holds two contradictory beliefs or teachings at the same time. Jehovah's Witnesses aren't stupid. They have just built an extremely strong mental wall of an indoctrinated defense system. Unless they have personally been affected negatively by something, or they personally start to question something on their own, they don't have any cracks in their dam yet. Their wall of indoctrination is extremely thick and sturdy. You can't also forget you're asking them to question things that they have been taught and indoctrinated to believe as absolute truth. There are even those out there who are disfellowshipped or just haven't been around the organization for a while, but are still very much indoctrinated. That's why there is the term POMI. They are physically out, but mentally they are still in. All because of their indoctrination. Everyone who is no longer one of Jehovah's Witnesses had something that started the crack in their dam. For my husband, it was the infighting he had seen among the elders in different halls he had attended. For me, it was the way my children had been treated by my family. For someone else, it might be something they came across accidentally, or something they hear or see that just doesn't make sense to them. I know it's easier to say someone is just too thick-headed, stupid, or blind to something that you see as so obvious. But in reality, it's that mental hold of indoctrination that they are under that just hasn't had a crack in it yet. Going at them or getting mad because they can't see something obvious just makes that indoctrinated mental wall go up. It's important to remember, if you were one of Jehovah's Witnesses, you too had that mental hold as well at one time, especially if you were indoctrinated before the internet. For me personally, like I said, the way my children were being treated is what started the crack in my dam. And it was only then that I started to notice other things that widened that crack enough where I eventually allowed myself to look at anything I wasn't supposed to. I honestly don't know where I would be right now if it wasn't for what happened to my children that caused me to have any seeds of doubt, which started that small crack in my indoctrinated mental wall. It doesn't take everyone, as long as it did me, for that mental hole to finally be broken. Fortunately for many, it only takes one thing and their mental wall comes crashing down. For others, it might take more. But I can say that once you have any nagging questions that causes a crack to develop in your indoctrinated mental wall, there's no fixing it. That seed of doubt doesn't go away. So maybe leave small comments or questions that can cause a witness to have a seed of doubt. But like I said, going at them directly might just push them away. Now, I've told you what caused that crack or seed of doubt for me. The way my children were treated because they stopped going to meetings. Can you briefly share in the comments what started the crack in your wall? Do you remember exactly what caused you to even question anything? I would be very interested in what caused the crack in your mental dam that caused you to have any seeds of doubt about the organization. I think others would as well. I would also like to hear from anyone that has tried to show their friends or family members something, hoping it would wake them up. What happened? Once again, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it has helped you in some way. As always, please take care, stay strong, and thank you very much for watching. In the following talk, you're going to see how Jehovah's Witnesses on one hand are told to be like the Bereans at Acts 17:11, where the Bereans actually used their critical thinking in making sure what the Apostle Paul stated was truth. In recent years, witnesses have been told that the Apostle Paul was part of the original governing body. So, in reality, to witnesses, they should see how the Bereans were commended for questioning a member of the governing body. Yet, witnesses don't see it that way, and the following is why. In this talk, witnesses are told to turn off that critical thinking the Bereans showed, and instead not question anything. Right off the bat, you will see how David Splain is talking about witnesses' faith. A witness's faith is all important to them because it means their relationship with God and their everlasting life. Then he immediately goes into anyone saying anything negative within the congregation, whether it's a family member or friend. Watch how he uses a scripture that makes all witnesses feel that there are those who might try to tell them something within the congregation that will attack their faith, that it's actually poison that can kill their faith in the organization or God. He's immediately telling them right off the bat that they need to shut down, not listen to anyone who says anything negative about the organization.
For the faith. Now, those are the words of Jude, the half-brother of Jesus, and it's important to consider them in their context. So let's do that. Please turn to Jude, verse 3, and then leave your Bibles open because we're going to consider another verse in Jude. And this will help us to get the point that Jude was making. Jude, verse 3. Now, Jude himself had been putting up a hard fight for the faith. Consider this. Just 3 years earlier, his own fleshly brother James was stoned to death at the order of High Priest Ananias. That was an open attack on God's people, and it must have been very painful to Jude and to others. But here's something interesting. Jude is not warning his brothers about High Priest Ananias or about persecution. He has something else in mind, a different type of attack, and this is a sneaky one. Let's look at verse 4, and we'll see why he wrote his letter. Notice the very first words. So this is what I have in mind when I'm writing you, brothers. My reason is that certain men have slipped in among you who were long ago appointed to this judgment by the Scriptures. So Jude is talking about false brothers who are presenting a real danger to the congregations, in some ways a greater danger than outright persecution. And did you notice what Jude said about those false brothers? They had slipped in. They were sneaky. Now, that was true back then, and it's true today, as we'll see. And brothers, this is a very serious matter that we're considering today. Think of this. Was the Christian congregation brought down by persecution in the 2nd and 3rd centuries? It wasn't. It was brought down by false brothers, apostate teaching.
Here, Explain is going to emphasize how negative talk, even if it comes from within the congregation, your friends or family, how even they can bring down the congregation. As a witness, I'm hearing that not only should you not listen to them or anything, but these can actually cause people to lose their faith in the organization, in God. He's emphasizing how this comes from Satan and how Satan is using them, again, your friends and family, to cause division between them and their faith in God.
And so the devil can use an outright attack. He can use persecution to try to batter the structure of the Christian congregation. But sometimes he uses rot from within, a subtle means to attack us. But whatever method he uses, we have to fight. Our faith is involved, and our faith is worth fighting for. It's a gift from Jehovah. We have to hold on to it. It's a product of His Holy Spirit, so we have to put up a hard fight for our faith. So in this talk, we're not going to discuss persecution. We're going to discuss two of the subtle means Satan uses to weaken our faith: apostasy and negative reports about Jehovah's Witnesses in the media. So first, let's talk about apostasy, and we'll call it spiritual poison. Now think about poison. What's the best way to avoid being poisoned? Well, we have to recognize poison when we see it and then avoid it. And the same principle applies to teachings that could destroy our faith. And that's not always easy. Now, not many of our brothers and sisters would deliberately get involved with apostates, but it could happen without our realizing it. We receive letters at times from brothers and sisters who are troubled by something they saw on a web page, an accusation, a rumor about the society or about the organization. And the problem is, they had no idea that apostates were behind it. It's tricky, because the apostates don't advertise, "You are now on an apostate web page." They often pose as sincere witnesses who just have questions or concerns. And some who aren't really apostates can cause just as much trouble as the apostates do by their negative talk and criticism. Brothers, we need to be on the alert. This is serious. Suppose that, out of curiosity, you get into a discussion forum with individuals who claim to be Jehovah's Witnesses. Now, maybe they are, maybe they aren't. You don't know. You've never met them. And someone starts asking questions. What did you think of last month's broadcast? Did you really find it encouraging? Or do you think the brothers who write Watchtower articles are living in the real world? I wonder if they realize just how hard it is out here. And then a few others join in with their own negative comments. Now, you don't know whether these individuals are apostates or brothers and sisters who are in serious spiritual trouble. But does it matter? How does it make you feel? When you leave the forum, do you feel upbuilt? Determined to expand your ministry? More convinced than ever that Jehovah has an organization that you love and that you're delighted to be a part of. You feel honored to be a part of that organization. Or does the experience leave you sad, uneasy, uncomfortable?
What we have seen so far in this talk is you're supposed to be, as a witness, on guard all the time for any negative talk against the organization. Anything negative is from Satan and trying to take you away from God. He even goes so far as to ask, how does this make you feel? Now, of course, as a witness, when you hear something that questions your belief system, it's upsetting. It's going to make you not feel good. So here Splain is saying, if you're hearing something that upsets you regarding God's organization, why would you listen to it? He's literally telling all witnesses to turn off any critical thinking. You see how he's telling all witnesses who love Jehovah and his organization not to listen to anything that gives a witness any type of negative feeling about the organization, which to them is like having negative feelings about God. The following will show you how witnesses are told not to use their critical thinking skills in many different avenues.
Now, someone might say, I need to get involved in that forum so I can help those people. They shouldn't be together. Even if they aren't apostates, they're not good for one another. Staying in that forum to help someone is like holding his hand while he drinks poison and then having some yourself so he doesn't have to drink alone. We need to follow the advice recorded at Romans chapter 16 and verse 17. Now think of this imaginary forum that we just described in the light of Romans chapter 16 and verse 17. Now remember, there's all kinds of negative talk flying around in this forum. You don't know who's behind it. And here's what it says in Romans 16 verse 17, and avoid them. Now think about that forum. Does it create divisions? Yes. Is it a cause for stumbling? Could be. Is it contrary to what we have learned? Do we even have to answer that question? Now, whether it's intended or not, the effect will be to weaken our faith. So what do we do? What does Paul tell us to do here at the end of verse 17? He says, avoid them.
Here, Stephen Lett is telling witnesses that they have to think the same way. And if they don't, they need to keep it to themselves. Everyone who listens to them is to avoid them.
Now, I'd like to say a kind word to some who may be involved in discussion forums. You may like to use this medium to blow off steam, so to speak. Maybe there are little things in the congregation that are happening that you wonder about, or decisions the elders have made that you wonder about, and so you get involved in the forum and you blow off steam, and after that you feel better. But what about others in the forum? How do they feel? Wouldn't you feel awful if negative comments you made were responsible for someone leaving the truth? I know you wouldn't want that to happen. So please, please, be careful about what you say. Now, another person might say, well, I can see where those warnings about apostates apply to so-and-so. He's weak, but don't worry about me. I'm spiritually strong. I can handle it. That's like a weightlifter thinking that he can drink a vial of poison and it won't hurt him because he's so big and strong. We are not so strong, so spiritual, so intelligent, that we can't be affected by the poison of apostate ideas. Now, when might we feel pressured to read something that the apostates have written? Consider this scenario. The unbelieving husband of your Bible student sends his wife a link to an apostate web page and says, here, you better look at this and see what you're getting into. Well, your student is concerned, and she wants you to take a look and tell her what you think. Well, that's not an option. Paul says, avoid them. That doesn't mean reading apostate literature or searching social media to see what they're saying about us. So what do you say to your student? You might say something like this. I can imagine that this is very upsetting for you, and you certainly do need to know what you're getting into. I have a suggestion. We have nothing to hide. When you're at the meetings, listen carefully to what the brothers are saying. Watch how we interact with one another. Take note of how the organization is financed. Get to know the elders, their wives. Introduce yourself to the circuit overseer and his wife when they come. Visit world headquarters of the branch. I'll come with you. I'll help you. And I want you to get really acquainted with the organization. And if you do, I'm sure you'll soon realize that what the people are saying about us isn't true.
Here, David Splain is not only telling all witnesses not to look at anything or listen to anything, but he is telling them to tell those who they are trying to bring into the organization not to look at anything except what the organization does. Again, telling both the witness and their Bible student not to question anything or use their critical thinking skills. He states they have nothing to hide, but telling them at the same time, don't look at anything independently. Don't do any independent research if it's negative. Why? Because it's poison.
Well, maybe you can think of a better answer, but you get the idea. Just a few drops of poison in a drink are enough to cause serious harm. And apostates often mix a few truths with lies. Do you remember Eliphaz, one of Job's false comforters? Some of what he said was true.
Now watch how Splain jumps to a subject that has nothing to do with anything negative about the organization. He is now focusing on false friends. What he is doing is gaslighting Jehovah's Witnesses. David Splain is taking something that might make a person question something regarding the organization and comparing that to Job's companions. Now, no witness wants friends like Job had during his time of trials, so why would they want to listen to any of their friends or family who has something negative to say, like Job had to deal with his false friends? This also includes what they might hear out in their ministry.
Some of what he said was true. Let's turn to Job chapter 5 and verse 13. Job chapter 5, I'll give you a moment, and verse 13. See if what I read sounds familiar. He catches the wise in their own cunning, so that the plans of the shrewd are thwarted. He catches the wise in their own cunning. Does that sound familiar? Why, yes. The Apostle Paul said the very same thing at 1 Corinthians 3:19. In fact, in the marginal reference, we see in the little a in the middle there, 1 Corinthians 3:19. Paul may even have been quoting Eliphaz. So that was the truth. But how did Jehovah feel about Eliphaz's argument overall? Let's turn to Job 42, verse 7, and see how Jehovah felt about it. Job 42 and verse 7. After Jehovah had spoken these words to Job, Jehovah said to Eliphaz the Temanite, My anger burns against you and your two companions, for you have not spoken the truth about me, as my servant Job has. A few grains of truth were mixed in with falsehoods, and at least some of what Eliphaz said was inspired by the demons. How do we know that? He admitted it. Notice Job 4, verses 15 through 17. I'll give you a moment. This is interesting. Job 4, 15 to 17. Eliphaz says, A spirit passed over my face. The hair of my flesh bristled. It then stood still. But I did not recognize its appearance. Let's stop there for a second. I did not recognize its appearance. So he didn't know whom he was talking to, just like someone in a discussion forum may not know whom he is talking to. Let's continue. He says, A form was in front of my eyes. There was a calm. And then I heard a voice. Can a mortal man be more righteous than God? Can a man be cleaner than his own maker? Does it surprise you that a demon will get involved in the debate between Job and the false comforters? It shouldn't. This was no small debate. It was a big issue. Satan had challenged Jehovah in the presence of all the angels that no man would keep his integrity under test. That demon was using Eliphaz to demoralize Job and weaken his faith. This was something that Job had to fight for, and Job fought back. Apostates are more active in some places than they are in others. So if there's a lot of apostate activity in your area, people in the territory may be listening, and they may challenge you when you meet them in the ministry. So how should you handle it? Don't try to argue with the apostates. Don't read their comments. Ask the elders or other experienced publishers for suggestions on how to answer the householders. Well, how poisonous are apostate teachings? Let's find out as we watch the following video.
The following videos are nothing more than gaslighting a witness. The organization basically is saying that there have been those who have questioned. But are they showing them in a positive or negative light?
When I was in my 40s, I was divorced. I had 3 younger kids at home. I was working 3 jobs, and I had drifted away from the congregation. I had an acquaintance who was telling me that I was in a cult and that I needed to look at some information that he had.
When I was about 30 years old, a fellow employee saw that I was one of Jehovah's Witnesses and was trying to access jw.org. He told me about someone he knew in another country who could prove to me that Jehovah's Witnesses didn't have the truth. That made me curious, and little by little I was persuaded to look at apostate material.
So I was born and raised in the truth, chose to dedicate myself to Jehovah at the age of 16. But I began to associate with people who had either formerly been associated with the truth or were very loosely associated with Jehovah and his organization. And that's really where the apostasy began to take root.
As I was reading this literature, I saw through it to an extent. But when you're drifting away, you're looking for a reason not to believe.
I began to feed my mind with different philosophies, different ideas, even studied different religions. And, you know, I told myself that I was doing that academically, but it started to influence the way that I thought and felt about things. Eventually, the elders reached out to me. I was very combative with those brothers. I even made the accusation that Noah's Ark was a fairy tale, that was part of mythology.
Those apostate doubts that I was reading kept going deeper and deeper into my heart. I stopped reading the publications. I stopped going to the meetings. And as a result, my spiritual routine was dead. So I thought I'd try to find truth elsewhere, and I looked for something out there that was in accord with what I knew the Bible taught. But I couldn't find anything.
Well, one Sunday morning, I rode by the Kingdom Hall, and I said to myself, oh, they're all in there waiting for Armageddon. Immediately, when I thought that thought, I said to myself, well, at least they feel good about themselves. How do you feel? And the answer was, I felt terrible.
Eventually, skillful use of the scriptures and just reasoning with me, the elders got me to realize that I had been carried off, or that I had been taken captive by human philosophy, by the deceptions and this empty reasoning of men.
I actually said a prayer. I supplicated Jehovah that he would really show me the way to the truth. And he took away this feeling of emptiness, spiritually speaking.
I realized that relationship with Jehovah, that's our most precious possession. I had to get back.
I started to study the Bible with sincerity. I wanted it to affect my mind and my heart, and I wanted it to affect change in my behavior. Now, as I did that, I felt Jehovah blessing those efforts. He began to help me to rebuild that relationship with him.
So I began to use Jehovah's name. Speaking about Jehovah became a wonderful joy and a great pleasure to me. And the result was that my ministry was very productive. And it's an amazing joy to be able to help someone come to love Jehovah.
I was just so happy to be back under Jehovah's wings and have that peace of mind. How loving Jehovah is. He wants to help us. And what better helper could we have? He's the best in the universe.
Now you're going to see how witnesses are being told to ignore anything in the media that is negative. Again, telling them to shut down their critical thinking before it can even start. even though many of these things have been proven true, such as child sexual abuse within the organization. This is why Jehovah's Witnesses don't even view news reports as truth at times. They're told that there are apostates lying behind these news reports. Watch how David's Blaine does this, how he says everyone is against all witnesses.
Now, let's consider the second challenge we face: negative reports about Jehovah's Witnesses in the media. Now, here's a good principle to follow. Proverbs 14 and verse 15. I'll give you a moment. Proverbs chapter 14 and verse 15. It says, "The naive person believes every word, but the shrewd one ponders each step." Some people believe everything they read in the newspaper or see on TV. Do you? Should you? Consider this. Now, you're working from door to door, and you meet a householder who says, "You Jehovah's Witnesses are terrible people. You let your children die. You don't accept medical treatment." Well, you ask the householder, "Do you know any of Jehovah's Witnesses personally?" "No." "Then where did you get the idea that we let our children die and don't accept medical treatment?" The householder says, "I have it on good authority. I read it in the newspaper." Well, if it's in the newspaper, it must be true, right? Not necessarily. Remember this: reporters have a deadline to meet, and a reporter may not have the time or the inclination to check the facts. Or the reporter may have written a balanced article, but then the editor changes it. Maybe the editor doesn't like Jehovah's Witnesses, or he's been misinformed about us. Now, it's bad enough if people in the world believe everything they read in the newspaper, but brothers, let's not be among them. Let's not be naive. Let's consider things carefully. Similarly, sometimes there's a TV program about Jehovah's Witnesses. Now, a few of these programs are balanced and fair. Many, or I dare say most, are not. And when they're not, you'll often find that the producers started out with a negative view of Jehovah's Witnesses, and then they looked for information to support their prejudice. So, whom did they turn to? Apostates and the clergy. From them, they got suggestions for people to interview, and we know what those people would say. At the very last minute, they may ask the brothers for comment just to give an appearance of fairness, but the program wasn't designed to be fair. It was designed to be unfair. It was slanted against Jehovah's Witnesses. Now, let's be clear. Some news organizations are very conscientious about their reporting, and they want to present both sides of an issue. And when Jehovah's Witnesses are concerned, they do so at their cost. If a newspaper publishes anything positive about us, the churches will push back. Our parishioners are upset. They subscribe to your newspaper, and they don't like reading favorable things about Jehovah's Witnesses. The message? If it ever happens again, you're going to lose subscribers. Now, this matter of Jehovah's people being the subject of malicious reports isn't new. Think about the days of Queen Esther.
Here you're going to see another case of gaslighting. Are witnesses a Haman willing to be naive and taken in? He says to check the facts, but how can witnesses check the facts if they aren't supposed to listen to anything negative? He's asking witnesses, are they willing to take in poison? He even goes into court cases, not always bringing out truth. David's Blaine even states how there are court cases that don't bring out truth, giving an example of a court case that was judged on a person's appearance, not facts, which sounded made up to me. Basically what he's saying is even if you hear of any court cases that doesn't prove anything at all.
brings a bad report to King Ahasuerus. The Jews don't obey our laws. They're a danger to society. Does Ahasuerus check the facts? Does he demand proof? No. Ahasuerus is naive. He allows himself to be taken in by Haman. Well, there are a lot of modern-day Hamans today, and they use similar tactics. As a result, some government officials are taken in. They believe the slanderous accusations of the apostates. Now, if they just take the time to check the facts, they'd see that they're being lied to, but they don't check the facts. Now, again, it's bad enough, brothers, when government officials are taken in by false reports. Don't you be taken in. Have you ever heard the expression trial by media? It works like this. Someone's charged with a crime, and the case is widely publicized in the media, and the media present the case in such a way that everyone who hears about it thinks the man is guilty. Of course, to avoid a lawsuit for slander or libel, these media reports are very carefully worded, and we need to understand what the wording means. Here's a good principle to keep in mind. Job chapter 12 and verse 11. It's amazing how many principles we can draw from the book of Job for this talk. Job chapter 12 and verse 11. This is Job speaking, and he says, "Does not the ear test out words as the tongue tastes food?" Does not the ear test out words? What does that mean? Does it mean that if we learn that apostates are going to be featured on a TV program, we should watch it to see if what they say is true? No. It basically means to consider the source of the words. If they are the words of apostates, why would we believe them? Now think of it this way. You have a bottle on your shelf that's marked poison. Do you need to open it up, take a swig, to see if it really is poison? Believe what the label says. Now, for the purpose of this discussion, let's consider another way we can test out words, and that is to pay attention to what the words mean. Remember, we talked about media reports and how these are very often carefully worded to avoid a lawsuit. So suppose a report indicates that someone has been charged with a crime or that he's being investigated. All right, you have two words, charged and investigated. It doesn't mean he's guilty. Or suppose that someone is convicted and put in jail. Well, that would apply to our young brothers in Korea, wouldn't it? They were convicted and jailed. And what was their crime? They refused to kill someone. Did they do anything wrong? Or someone is found guilty by men, as Jesus was. It doesn't mean that he's guilty in the sight of God. So, brothers, we really have to think about these things. We may read that a person or an organization was sued and then settled out of court. Does settling out of court mean that they were guilty? Not necessarily. Now, in this country and others, court cases are often handled by a jury. Now, who are on the jury? Ordinary citizens with no legal training. But not only that, these ordinary citizens don't always have access to all the facts because the judge and lawyers decide which facts will be shared with the jury. So it's unlikely that the whole truth will ever come out in court. Actually, neither side probably wants the whole truth to come out in court. Now, sometimes attorneys deliberately withhold information that would be prejudicial to their clients. And in addition, the juries have prejudices like everyone else, and some of them just can't set their prejudices aside. I'll tell you an actual experience. Some time ago, a lawyer told me about a case he had. That was a case of medical malpractice by a doctor. There was a jury, and at trial, the doctor was clearly shown to be in the wrong, but the jury didn't give the patient a penny. The lawyer was confused, so after the trial, he approached two of the jurors and asked, "If you don't mind, tell me which part of the testimony you didn't believe." The jurors replied, "Oh, we didn't get that far. The doctor was cute, and we didn't want him to have to pay anything." With deep thinkers like that, no wonder many lawyers try to settle their cases rather than bring them to a jury. But someone will say, "No, I don't believe in settling out of court. I believe in justice and truth." So that brings up the question, is it wrong to settle a matter before it goes to trial? Or is it scriptural? Let's let Jesus answer that question. Turn to Matthew chapter 5, verses 25 and 26. Interesting that Jesus should mention this with all the important things that Jesus taught. Matthew chapter 5, verses 25 and 26. Be quick to settle matters with your legal opponent while you are with him on the way there, so that somehow the opponent may not turn you over to the judge, and the judge to the court attendant, and you get thrown into prison. I say to you for a fact, you will certainly not come out of there until you have paid over your last small coin. Now, this is interesting. Think about the Mosaic Law. Was there any provision in the Mosaic Law to throw someone in jail if he couldn't pay a debt? That wasn't the way. If he couldn't pay, he'd have to work it off, or a family member would have to work it off. So when Jesus talks about prison and a judge, he's obviously referring to what a Gentile judge would do. Now, you couldn't necessarily expect justice from him. Why might he rule against our brother? Well, maybe he got paid under the table by the other party. Or maybe he was prejudiced against the race or the religion of the other party. Now notice, Jesus didn't say that the man should settle only if he was guilty. So brothers, let's not be naive. Don't believe everything you read. Just because an article is called a news report doesn't make it true. And an editorial is someone's opinion, and that someone may be wrong. And TV producers may have their own agenda, prejudice, and viewpoint. So, what do we say in revision? In conclusion, our faith is under attack, and we have to fight. And Jehovah gives us what we need to fight with. One of the things he gives us, good associations. Satan will try to lure us away from good associations. He'll try to weaken our faith by getting us involved in bad association without our knowing it. But Jehovah provides good association in the congregation. These are people we know. These are people we love. These are people who have our best interests at heart. Keep in mind the principle we find at Proverbs 13 and verse 20. The one walking with the wise will become wise, but the one who has dealings with the stupid will fare badly. You know the members of your congregation. You know that they are wise. You know that they have your best interests at heart. But if you get involved in a forum, you might not know whether you're walking with wise persons or not, at least not at first. So be careful. If the conversation turns negative, get out. Satan is behind the twisted teachings of apostates. He's the father of the lie. And those who lie are doing exactly what their father does. The apostates have nothing to offer us, brothers. All they have to offer is hate. All they have to offer is criticism and negative talk. But oh, how upbuilt we feel when we're with those who love Jehovah. So Jehovah provides us with good, wholesome associations. He also provides us with his word of truth, and an accurate knowledge of the truth is the best defense against apostasy. Read the Bible every day and meditate on it. Pay attention to the words. Pay attention to what they mean. Be like the Bereans, referred to in Acts chapter 17 and verses 10 and 11. Let's read that. Acts chapter 17, verses 10 and 11. Immediately by night, the brothers sent both Paul and Silas to Berea. On arriving, they went into the synagogue of the Jews. Now these were more noble-minded than those in Thessalonica, for they accepted the word with the greatest eagerness of mind, carefully examining the Scriptures daily, to see whether these things were so. Now Paul compares the Bereans with the Thessalonians. What do we know about the Thessalonians? Well, they didn't have YouTube in those days, but at one point, the Thessalonians apparently heard a rumor that the day of Jehovah had arrived. Who circulated the rumor? An apostate? Maybe. But maybe it was just someone who had heard the rumor and passed it on without checking it out. Have you ever done that? Passed on a report without checking the facts? I think all of us have to admit that we've been guilty of that at one time or another. But now, how did the Thessalonians react? They were alarmed. They were quickly shaken from their reason. We mustn't let that happen to us. When you hear something, check it out. Don't just circulate it. Don't just believe it. Check it out. Colossians 2, 6, and 7, the last scripture we'll read during this talk. And here Paul explains how we can avoid being quickly shaken from our reason. Let's read this final scripture. Colossians chapter 2, verses 6 and 7. Therefore, just as you have accepted Christ Jesus the Lord, go on walking in union with Him. You do that, and you'll be walking with a wise one, certainly, being rooted and built up in Him, and then notice this, and being stabilized in the faith, just as you were taught. If we're stabilized in the faith, we won't be quickly shaken by unfounded accusations by apostates or the media. False rumors are often spread during wartime. Brothers, this is war. We need to put up a hard fight for the faith, as if our life depended on it, because it does.
In this talk, you've seen how David Spillane has told all witnesses to check everything out. But witnesses are indoctrinated to only check facts on the JW website. This is the indoctrination witnesses are under. Why showing them facts in the media or anything else puts up that indoctrinated mental wall of defense. This talk is a perfect example of what witnesses hear on a regular basis. Why it's so hard to get through to a witness, and why going at them with pure facts doesn't work. Because they are rumors and Satan apostate-driven lies that they can't listen to. Remember, truth will always stand up to scrutiny. There's a reason the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses don't want their followers to investigate, listen, or watch anything negative, including the media. It's a simple answer. The Watchtower organization's teachings can't stand up to scrutiny, and they know it. Many wonder why there are so many PMOs out there. Those who are physically in, but mentally out. Those who stay in because of loved ones. Why anyone would stay in despite the fact that they know the facts about the Watchtower organization and not just speak up for truth. Now, you see why they can't. I hope this helps you understand the mindset of witnesses and the complete mental hold that they have on them. What you have just seen in this talk is an example of the total indoctrination that witnesses are constantly under, something witnesses are hearing on a regular basis. Thanks for staying through the whole video. Take care.